Well, hello again. Welcome to Horror in Detail. Today we are going to share Wendigo encounter stories. First story. This story was shared by you/Sugavin, so credits to him. There is something unexplainable in the forests of Oklahoma. The United States is, no doubt, a diverse land of many different forms of life. From the fierce grizzly bears in the mountains of Alaska, to the stealthy alligators in the swamps of Florida. Wherever you may be, there is always something unique about your state. That is until you get to Oklahoma. You see, Oklahoma is without a doubt, one of the most boring places, maybe, ever. Having lived here for 18 years, I'll be the first person to tell you that. Sure, there are large cities, just like any other civilization, however they are spread out over tens, even hundreds of miles apart. What you are left with in between those cities is what some refer to as the sticks, or the boondocks, or the country, whatever you choose to call it, and that is where I'm from. In the sticks it consists of four main elements: lots of trees, lots of crops, lots of wildlife, and the occasional Walmart or Dollar General. Since there is not a lot to do out here, that is where most Oklahoma residents take up the pastime of hunting, and that is where my story begins. It was a cold November night, right in the heart of deer season. I was laying in bed enjoying a video game I was playing, when there was a knock on my bedroom door. It opened, and my dad walked in. "Hey kid," he said. "Yes, Dad." "You haven't been hunting this season yet, why don't you take my bow and I'll get you set up, and in the morning you can head out there, and go kill us something." Wow, he's really putting me on the spot here. I thought to myself. Yeah, sure, why not? I said to him. He told me to dress warm and to meet him outside by the front door in 10 minutes so we could walk out to the spot, so I would know where to go when it was time to leave tomorrow. We began our walk into the woods. With every step we took, I began to get a little bit more annoyed. Where are we going? I thought we were just gonna go behind the house. I didn't know we were gonna have to hike to the hunting spot. Damn, what was I thinking? I should have just said no. When we finally arrived at the hunting spot, we were more than a mile out into the wilderness behind my house. He finally stopped by a huge oak tree and pointed his flashlight at some cedar trees that were off to the side. "Do you see it?" he said. "No," I replied. He walked closer and shined his flashlight into the trees, to reveal a tiny chair that was hidden under some tree branches and sticks. "That is where you're gonna set up in the morning, got that?" I nodded my head as he tossed out some dried corn, to attract the deer in the morning, when I came back. "What time do I need to head out here?" I asked my dad, expecting him to say 6 to 7 a.m. He then muttered, "You need to be up and ready to head out by 4 a.m. My heart sank. It was going to be pitch black outside. There's no way I was going to be able to make it all the way out here in the pitch black. We finally made it back to the house by 11:30 and I headed up to my room, to get as much sleep as possible before this hunting trip. I awoke to the painful sound of my alarm blaring into my dark room. I looked at my phone and it was 3:40 a.m. I sighed and sat up. I put on the warmest clothes I could find and made my way out into the living room. There on the couch sat my dad's bow, 2 arrows, and a small but sharp hunting knife. I grabbed the gear plus a flashlight and made my way out the front door. Navigating the woods at night was an extremely frightening experience that took much longer than what I would have wished. I left my house at 4 a.m. and I did not arrive at the hunting location until 4:37. I was impressed with just how many trees I managed to walk into and how many times I almost tripped over large logs, even with the help of my flashlight. Once I arrived, I sat down in the little uncomfortable plastic chair and began waiting. My dad wanted me out here so early because it makes it a lot easier for the hunter to sneak into his spot and the deer not being able to watch him. I'll never forget the paranoia I experienced in those woods, in the pitch black. The feeling of not wanting to breathe too loud because something or someone might hear you is like no other. After roughly 15 minutes of sitting in the quiet darkness, I heard it. Sticks snapping and leaves crunching. It was a deer walking to my spot. My heart began to pound as I listened closer. The leaves continued to crunch with each footstep, but that's when I picked up on something strange. Is this thing walking on two legs? I thought to myself. It sounded just like a pair of human legs walking through the leaves. Is it my dad? I thought. Maybe I forgot something at the house. Surely it has to be him. But no, it couldn't have been him. The footsteps were coming from the woods, not the trail we walked. The footsteps emerged from the woods, and stopped. After a short pause, it took one step towards me. A moment later, it took one more step in my direction. I began to get nervous. Deer shouldn't be acting this way. What the hell is this thing? I raised my flashlight up from my lap, and in a moment of pure bravery and stupidity I clicked my flashlight on. What I saw in front of me still haunts me to this very day. In front of me stood a creature no shorter than 10 feet tall. It stood on two legs. It was covered in black fur. The face was human, I believe. The face looked to be of a man's face. The eyes were closed and the mouth was contorted into a sinister grin. It had two great big antlers that seemed to come off of an elk or a moose. It had hooves for feet, and its arms were long and skinny but had what appeared to be claws on the end of its hands. As soon as I saw this thing, I clicked off my flashlight, praying it didn't see me. Too late. I almost started gagging from fear when I heard this thing sprinting at me. As fast as I could, I loaded an arrow and drew back the bow. Without hesitation I fired the bow into the darkness, hoping I could hit the creature, but I missed. I heard the arrow whistle off into the woods before striking a tree. Shit. Stupid idea. I thought. I immediately stood up and began sprinting down the trail. The creature was in close pursuit. I ran faster than I knew I could down this trail. When I was almost halfway home, I began to naturally run slower because of fatigue, and that's when it swiped at me. It hit me directly in my right calf. I stumbled and fell off the trail and into a nearby ditch. Once I fell in, I could immediately feel the warm blood begin to start gushing out of my leg. I quickly tore off my hoodie and wrapped it around my leg as a temporary tourniquet. However, my bleeding leg was the least of my worries. The creature jumped down into the ditch with great force and began swiping at the ground, hoping to hit me. Luckily, the thing landed about 20 feet away from me, so I had some time to spare. I hurriedly pulled out my flashlight and threw it behind the creature. Upon hearing the flashlight hit the leaves, it turned around and began swiping at the ground once again. As quickly and quietly as possible, I crawled out of the ditch. On my way out, I heard the creature begin to make a clicking noise from its mouth. Now I can't confirm it, but I assume that noise was the creature using echolocation to find me. If this thing is blind, how did it see my flashlight back at the hunting spot? I thought. Then I realized I had to click my flashlight on, and the creature probably heard that. Despite now knowing it was using audio to track me, I still ran to the best of my ability out of the woods. The thing didn't follow me out. I made it home and crashed through my front door, bleeding all over the place. My parents took me to the ER to get stitched up. They asked me what happened and I told them what happened, but of course they didn't believe me. They assumed I fell while walking through the woods and tore open my leg somehow. And after a while I began to think the same thing. Maybe I was sleepwalking and fell, maybe I was hallucinating, who knows, is what I used to tell myself. I almost forgot about my experience until today. My dad went out hunting and was supposed to be back 3 hours ago. Me and my mother began to get worried. I walked out my front door. I planned on going to look for my dad, and that's when I heard it. Screaming. I don't know if it was my dad's or if it was just a wild animal, but we called the police anyway, and as I type this, I can hear a faint clicking out by the woods, and if I look hard enough, I think I can make out a human face, looking up at my window. Please, if you are ever in the forests of Oklahoma, be extra quiet. You never know who or what is going to hear you. Second story. This STPRY was shared by you/Deliriations, so credits to him. The forest where the deer cry blood. I had been a hunter for most of my life leading up to this incident. The smell of the warm air and the beauty of nature always had me at ease. I never felt scared alone at night because I have seen everything there is to be scared of. I have seen bears the size of a small car and animals so vicious they would kill anything that moved. The one thing I was never scared of was deer. I had heard the tales of the Skinwalker, the Wendigo, and pretty much anything in between. My uncle was an expert in tracking and hunting. We always went on trips together and would always come back with a fresh kill. He had something about him, it was a rule. I remember it so vividly because it was weird. He never wanted to go hunting in winter. I never asked why. I don't know, but something about it always had me on edge. One day it was winter and I was about to go deer hunting when my uncle stopped at my front door. When he came in he saw my packed supplies and my rifle and knew I was about to go hunting. He immediately burst into a wrath of anger as he dragged me to a wall and got into my face. "What the fuck do you think you're doing?" His spit went all over my face as he looked crazy. He looked primal, as if he was fearful of something that he did not want to share. It's the same face you would expect a child to make if they were dumped in the middle of nowhere, the same face of fear you see in people who have PTSD. I calmly brushed him off and got to the door saying I was going hunting. I was not about to fight with my uncle and ruin this trip, as I hadn't gone hunting for close to a month. When you hunt you get adjusted to it, and when you go on breaks you actually miss it. As I got into my truck my uncle peered at me out the window. He was there to take care of my house, but before I reversed he left with the door open. My uncle is prone to outbursts. As I should mention, he's only ever done it a few times and it's always in a situation where the reaction suits it. Not this one, however. What was so bad about hunting in the winter? The spot I had planned was an isolated one. It was a very heavily forested area which I had not been to before. I obviously had mapped the area out and brought essential survival tools in case the worst came. But I never thought I would have to use it after all those years out in the forest. When I arrived the crisp cold air immediately saturated me in discomfort. I quickly got another layer of clothes on before I started to walk to where I would set up camp for the night. The clearing I had chosen was a pretty tight one. There was a big tree in the center that stood tall above the rest. It was called the Forest Star, which suited it. Around the clearing the forest was extremely dense, almost no sun shone through the top. There was a small hunting tower north of the entrance of the clearing, so it was a direct walk from camp. As I walked ahead I noticed something. There were small droplets of blood littering the ground. My first thought was that it must have been an injured animal or something like that, but the droplets were small and almost even. I shook the thought out of my head and made it to my setup, and I started to pin my tent. When I was done, I checked my watch. It was around 5:30 p.m. I had around 2 hours for hunting before it was pitch black, and so I made it to the tower. When I undid my rifle from its case, I heard scampering. Shaking it off, I took position and waited. As I stood there, time almost slowed down. I was in a precise focus and was ready for anything. I wasn't ready for what I saw. Out came two small bucks that seemed injured. There were small droplets of blood coming from their eyes. As I focused and I saw that it wasn't dried blood, it was fresh and it was oozing from their eyes. I was shocked. I had never seen anything like it. Multiple scenarios ran through my head. I was thinking, had a hunter shot both of them in the eyes and managed to not kill them, but each scenario seemed more unlikely than the last. I took aim at the closest one and shot it. It stood there for a second, just not moving. Then they trotted off as if nothing had happened. Blood was running from the wound, so I had obviously hit it, but it didn't seem scared nor fazed. I decided that was enough and sort of jogged to my site. I was freaked out and decided that I'd cook dinner and go to bed early. When I scampered around my pack, I pulled out a tin of beans. I grabbed a pot and started a fire and began cooking them. As I cracked open a beer, the familiar sound of a branch snapping sounded off next to me. I thought it was probably just a small deer, and I brushed it off as I sat and relaxed. I was thinking about the deer, and I started to chalk it up to the fact I must not have hit deep, and the deer were shocked. When I finished eating, I went to bed. I was shivering in the night cold, and I could feel my body shaking uncontrollably. As I dozed off after a brutal 2 hours of cold, I heard another snap. This time, however, it was a lot louder. Like a bear. I immediately grabbed my rifle and went out of my tent. My fire burned low, and in the distance I saw two red lights. I walked towards it when my mind started to race. Something felt wrong. As I closed the distance, my gut was literally twisted, my mind was anxious, and I felt like I was about to break down. Then I realized what was wrong. Those weren't lights. They were two big, beady, solid red eyes. There were no pupils, they were just orbs hovering. When I realized, I stood frozen. I thought it was a big cat, but what emerged was so much worse. Its fur was black, darker than the night around us. Its antlers grew twisted and uneven. But the worst part? It was crying blood. Deep red droplets were pelting down its unnatural eyes. I couldn't make a sound. I was frozen in fear. Then it started to make sounds, the sounds of a baby crying. It was horrible. The sounds of unnatural wails filled the cold air, making it worse. My body felt crumpled, and so I finally broke out into a sprint. When I looked back, it stood there. It wasn't even breathing. But the sounds of that baby crying weren't fading. It was like a speaker was attached to my ear. When I made it back to camp, I rushed to pack my stuff. In a hurry, I ran, leaving the tent behind, and I rushed to my truck. As I fumbled with the keys, I saw that something was walking slowly towards me. That's when the whispering started. Terrible faint voices echoed throughout the forest as my mind started to close. I felt my cerebral melting as anything I tried to do would not happen. It was like sleep paralysis. As I stood there, I found the strength to finally open the door and get in my car. I slammed the door shut, and that thing was right at the window. I started to sob as I jammed the keys in the ignition. My mind felt fried as I swerved out of there. I didn't care if I hit anything. I just wanted to be away from that thing. Before I could properly back out, it stood up on its legs and it repeated a voice I recognized, You do not escape the forests are mine. It was my grandpa's voice. He died when I was 6 and I never knew any of the details. The thing then made a howl, a terrible shrieking howl that hurt my entire body. As it did so, I heard scampering as more of those things came out. They had blood running from their eyes as well. The baby cries started again, and that's when I finally drove out of that fucking place. When I raced home, I immediately barged into the door. My shoulder ached, but I didn't care. I shoved my door and locked it and ran into my kitchen. That's when I saw my uncle sitting at the table enjoying a small glass of scotch. So, you saw what I did, didn't you, Anthony? I couldn't form words. I was so shocked. My uncle came up to me and said, "What you saw out there is my rule I abide by. There are things in those forests in winter that are so horrible even the most seasoned can't handle it. I saw it when I was a boy, and since then I don't hunt during winter." I finally mustered a sentence. What was it? He took a small sip before sitting me down. "You saw something called Urbarak. It is an ancient being that dwells in the forests during these winters. Hunters who see it usually never are the same again, but some never come home." I was lucky. My uncle sort of sniffled as he told me about his encounter with Urbarak. When I was 23, my father and I went out into the woods on a very cold winter to hunt. Our family was struggling, so we didn't have much food. When we were hunting, my father called out to me, but before I could even get to him, I heard him yell out before he fell silent. I never saw him again. But what stood there was worse than the loss of my own. A deer with red eyes, black fur and twisted antlers stood there. Blood was running from its eyes. Then it started to cry like a baby. My uncle broke down and had to take a second before continuing. I comforted him as I was teary-eyed. It ran after me, Anthony. On 2 legs. It was like a human and I rushed to get away from it. I managed to get myself. He rolled up his sleeve to reveal a terrible red scar that ran across the entire underside of his arm. It was trying to feast on me. It knew I feared it. But eventually I managed to lose it. He finally finished his scotch before continuing. I was stuck in those forests for 3 days fighting to survive. I heard its cries and whispers all around as I tried to make it out. I finally arrived at a road and was taken in by the police. No trace was found of my father except for one thing. They found blood at the scene and tested it. It was my father's. What was strange about it? It was mixed with his tears. My uncle finally stood up. "Fear it, for it knows who you are." Those were his last words. He left my house and the police found him wrapped up in a noose 2 days later. It broke me. My hunting buddy and best friend was gone. There was one detail about his suicide that was never resolved. He had droplets of blood coming from his eyes. The coroner's inspection said it was an aneurysm. But I'm not so sure that is the truth. I am 50 now and I haven't been hunting in 2 decades. I can't even go into the forests anymore. I'm thinking about going back and seeing what Urbarak is. Maybe I can kill him. Beware Urbarak, for he lurks in the cold. 3rd story. This story was shared by you/horror mode, so credits to him. If you ever hear a cry for help at night while camping, ignore it. I love to camp, but after my most recent trip, I don't think it will ever be the same. I set up my tent on nice, flat ground and collected some wood for a fire. The night came with all its nightly sounds, and I relaxed at the hooting owls and chirping crickets. Even better was the fact that no one else was around. Help. It was subtle. I almost missed it. The voice came from deep within the woods, and for a moment I didn't believe what I was hearing. It sounded female, but oddly enough, I just couldn't tell. Please help, it continued. I shined my flashlight between the bushes and walked around. To be completely honest, even as a grown man, I was paralyzed with fear. So, I did the responsible thing and called the local police. That's when things went from odd to very, very weird. The police told me to ignore it. I explained to them that someone could be injured and probably needed medical attention, but they assured me otherwise. When I kept pushing and asked why, they told me, "Sir, if you ever hear that voice again, ignore it. Do not respond, and do not approach." Well, I did hear it again. But I didn't ignore it. It was almost midnight when I heard the voice a second time. I awoke to someone whispering, "Help," and it sounded like she was just outside my tent. I went out to check and no one was there, but the voice continued from a distance, "Help. Please." Again I grabbed my flashlight and looked around the area I was camping. I was too afraid to follow the voice into the woods, especially since the authorities themselves avoided it. But I struggled morally, trying to decide whether I should go and help this person or listen to the police, who were concerned for my safety. But then I heard another, different voice. This other voice, which also seemed to be coming from the woods, was an octave lower. Unlike the first one, which cried for help, this one was loud and demanding. "Quiet," the other voice demanded. "No one's going to help you." Once I heard that, I was sure someone was in trouble. I called the police again. When I informed them about a second voice coming from the woods, they seemed even more concerned. They told me that I should pack my things and leave the campsite immediately. They said that hearing the second, more manly voice meant that it was getting desperate. They also said that the two voices were coming from the same person. That part was bizarre and confused me, to say the least. It was at this point I dismissed the police in that area as crazy, but not before telling them off. I got angry. I told them that if they didn't get down here to come and check it out, then I would do it myself. I said repeatedly that a woman could be in serious trouble and that it was their duty to help her, but still they refused to come. All they kept repeating to me over the phone was, "Do not enter the woods, sir." They seemed more afraid than I was. Once I hung up the phone, I heard the voices again. A gentle, "Please, somebody help me." And then a growling, "Quiet. No one's coming." It was a little past midnight at that point. I couldn't live with myself knowing that I had the chance to save someone's life but instead cowered. So, I grabbed some things and ventured into the woods. When I entered the woods, the voices ceased. Just like that. No cries, no whispers, and no commands. Even the owls and crickets went away. Nothing but dancing leaves and creaking tree branches. I stopped walking and looked around, a full 360 degrees. "Hello? Anyone here?" I called out. "Nothing. I'm here to help." I continued. "Where are you? Are you okay?" Still nothing. I thought of calling the police again, then chuckled to myself. I found it strange but somewhat comforting that I didn't find anyone out there. Nonetheless, I was still creeped out, so I packed my things and finally left the campsite. I didn't know why the police, of all people, were so afraid. Worst case, someone was in actual danger and we've all failed them. Best case, morons who think saying, "Help me," in the middle of nowhere is a great idea for a prank. To be honest, when I heard the voice the very first time, I did think it was a joke. When I heard it the second time, along with that other voice, I became a bit more concerned. And same with the third time I heard it in the woods. But when I heard it again a fourth time, a week after I left the campsite, coming from inside my own house, I became very, very concerned. Thanks a lot for watching the video till the end. Subscribe to our channel Horror in Detail. Drop your opinions/suggestions in the comments section, and like the video as it helps with the YouTube algorithm.